Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Psyched to be with you, with me, your host Christopher Leach, and again, another super, mega special, awesome guest. Now, listeners, if you've been with me before, you know that I have been prone to being starstruck and to, on occasion, ever so slightly swoon over my guests. I'm afraid we're going to have to dial those both up to maximum, if not going beyond whatever we have had before for this guest. I'm tremendously excited. This is perhaps one of the last few times I'll say someone I met through PAX-ish related shenanigans. This is episode 10 coming up, so yeah, I'm really excited. This is going to be special. Buckle up, get yourself a beverage, and get ready to enjoy. All that's left for me to do is pass over to you, my very special guest. If you could please tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Jen Kretchmer. I am an author. I wrote on Candlekeep Mysteries for D&D, Starfinder, Haunted West. I'm working on a Nazi's Tapestry of Lives for Neverending, and a few other things that I can't talk about yet. I'm also a producer. I'm a streamer. I'm on Children of Erte, which is Demiplane's show with our DM Deborah Ann Wool. I am part of Vampire the Nightlife for Renegade. Radiant Stories again for Neverending. I'm an actor. I do all sorts of stuff there. I'm a disability consultant. I've worked for a bunch of different places, including Skybound on the Walking Dead franchise. And I created the Accessibility and Gaming Resource Guide. So yeah, I do all sorts of stuff.
I
A lot
mean,
of weird jobs.
it might have been quicker to say, what don't you do? That might have been a shorter answer, am I right? Such as the talent and expertise on display.
Sports is the answer there.
Sport? Okay, fair. Fair. We just haven't found the right sport yet. That's what I would say. Yeah, so, Jen, am I right to call you Jen? Is that all right?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
absolutely.
excellent. I had the pleasure of sharing the East stage with you at PAX East 2022. I forgot what year it was for a second. When we did our panel on disability, the plot device, that was amazing. I'm going to say again, just for the sake of it being on tape, thanks for being a part of that. I just kind of like
It's an
shot an
amazing
arrow
panel.
in the dark because you're so big on Twitter with what you do with your disability stuff. I was a huge fan for far too long. I will not shy away from that. So yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. You do a lot of cool stuff.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Let's tear into that a little bit more. So you do act and stuff. Talk to me about that.
I've been doing acting since I was a kid. I just there's something really I love storytelling in any form. And so that's one form of storytelling. Writing is in a lot of ways very similar. But yeah, I started acting when I was about 12, and then, never stopped. And so I've worked in theater and in film and TV, and it's a ton of fun. I love it. Um, yeah,
Okay,
I don't
no, that's
know.
fine. And then you bring that to stuff like actual plays is how they're called, right? That's
Yeah, absolutely. I think what has happened with actual plays is it's become this amazing fusion of, writing and performing and storytelling and gameplay. And it's been amazing to see that industry pop up and create these opportunities for people to have this new medium, and I think it's an art form, to express ourselves.
so I for the longest time was the wrong type of nerd, and I'd never got into TTRPGs. Just never. It was
No
something I just
such thing.
never got into, and did, and I immediately fell in love with it because it combined some of my favorite things: stats and funny voices. Um,
Hmm.
and that is an ideal combination in any regard, in my view. So just for the sake of listeners that maybe don't know what the heck we're talking about, let's just dive
Yeah.
into that a little bit. So you're doing acty things with a thing where we roll dice.
Yeah, so the idea behind a tabletop role-playing game is that you are taking on, if you're a player, if you're the dungeon master or game master, it's a little bit different because you're controlling the environment and the non-player characters. But if you are a player, you are taking on the persona of a character, and you have stats and traits and abilities that character would have. and you are put into situations and you react in the ways which that character would react, and you interact with the rest of your party as that character. So for some people, that means describing that, and then for some people that means really like acting it out and getting into character with voices. Some people like to dress up. Some people do a mix of all of those things. So it really can be very individual how role playing manifests. But for a lot of actual plays, um, performers are drawn to them because it's an opportunity to do, improvisational storytelling with people, but with these characters that are following game mechanics and game stats.
That was a better description than I think I could ever come up with, because it's like turn up and try and be entertaining, I guess. Like, again, very little experience. I've done like a little bit of D&D, like as a player. I've done a little bit of June, like choose the 2D20 system as a
Mhm.
player and as a GM. Players never do what you think they're going to do. Am I right?
Never,
Like,
never.
always
You
good
can think
times.
you've anticipated everything, and they will do something that you couldn't have possibly expected.
I think I'm interested in speaking to you as someone who's an actor and sort of is a professional and embodying these people, because I kind of let the stats guide the kind of character that I want to be, if that makes sense. So,
Mhm.
like, for example, in a previous game, I played take this psychomancer who was a cleric. So, like, I was like, okay, this is almost the antithesis of me, because they have like no intelligence. I perceive myself to be intelligent, lol. But they're like very, they're wise. They believe in faith, and like trying to embody that was different, sort of my everyday experience. Now, when
Yeah.
you take that to like a professional level, how do you get inside like the personality of a character, but also allow what they do be up to chance?
So, I mean, I think it's a mix of a couple of things. Preparing for an acting role is a little bit different in some ways because you know where the story is going to go. So you can prepare to tell that arc, and you're working on dialogue and creating subtext and things like that. When you're doing an actual play, you have no idea what's going to happen. So you can get to know your cast and you can sort of get a sense of how they usually respond to things. And if you've been in the cast for a while, you sort of know how characters respond and what your function in the party is, both as a character and an archetype, but also uh, as a player and as a personality and a human, as a you human. But no, I think you do let the stats lead you. I think they do inform how you react to what's happening. So if you have a if you have a character, for me, I always think of intelligence more as book learning rather than
Yeah.
intellectual capacity, because I think there's a tendency to really kind of skew into some very ableist notions when you go into intelligence ideas. So I know there are also definitions that I like that have to do with memory, and your ability to retain information.
Hmm.
Um, but so if I'm going, okay, so this is a person who hasn't had a lot of schooling and education, but they have high wisdom, so they're very perceptive. They're going to have with a quick scan of their surroundings, they're going to pick up on a lot of things. They're going to notice a lot of things. They're going to be very aware of what's happening. Um, then I can lean into those things as we're talking. I might not have my character use big words, and they might not always understand um, any sort of academic things that people are talking about or history, or have a reference point for those things. But they're going to have these other types of awareness that are important and valuable to the story. They also are likely to have a little bit more impulse control than some of the other characters might, and those are things that are going to inform that. I also love letting the dice dictate my responses to things. So I will roll to see how an interaction's going and then respond accordingly. A lot of people try and play out a scene without rolling the dice, or they'll roll the dice after doing a moment. So if you're doing like a charisma check on something, for me, I'd rather do that check in the beginning so I know how I want to play that moment out and react to something.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm a big fan of that. Like, roll the dice and then play it out. Like, describe what you want to do with what you've
because
got.
it makes successes fun, but it also makes failures fun. Um, I have a character who the first time she ever brought out a bladed weapon rolled a crit. And so all of a sudden she's like, oh, maybe this is actually a good idea. Maybe this is something this character should lean into rather than, shy away from. or a character who horrifically fumbles something might in the future never want to do that thing again. And that's fun to let those roles inform the arc of the character,
Mm.
not just that particular moment, but just how that person develops. Trying to think of these not just as a collection of numbers, but as actual people with ambitions and goals and interests, and who are responding and learning from what they're doing. I mean, that's literally the function of experience points, is to have experience and learn from it and use that to grow and develop.
Okay. One of the little threads I just want to pull on for a second. Something you mentioned there was like, when you say you're doing acting, it's like you have a script, you kind of know the story of the film or the production or whatever, but you don't have that in actual plays, right? And just because I heard the audible gasps, but it's all improv, right? Like the whole point of a TTRPG setting is that the world is co-created by everyone at the table, and that means anything can happen, and nothing is on the cards until it is.
So I think there are a range of ways that people do actual plays. And I think depending on what style of actual play you're working on, they can go in different ways. So I have done shows where we'll have sort of guideposts, especially when you have a shorter run of something, when you only have 3 episodes or you only have 6 episodes and you're trying to feature a new system or a product, and you want to make sure that you get to hit certain moments and show things off. You might have a conversation with the DM saying, hey, we need to get to a certain point today. So I need you all to make sure that when you hit this fork in the path, if you can take the right side, I don't care what else you do, but just take the right path.
Mm-hmm.
And head toward the temple or whatever it is. That's kind of the extent usually of the most scripting you'll have. And that's usually because you have only a very limited time and you want to tell a cohesive story. And you are aware, for me, an actual play you have to respect your audience and their time. And it should be entertaining. To me, an actual play is not your home game put on stream. An actual play needs to be taking the audience into account and welcoming them in to that story
I just had a
and
few more
including
audible
them.
gasps there.
I know, I know, shocking, right? But so I come at this from kind of a directorial perspective as well as a production perspective, of wanting to give a satisfying episode. I want my episodes to have a beginning, middle, and end. I want my season arc to have a beginning, middle, and end, and I want my story arc to have a beginning, middle, and end. I think that's important because I want to have an emotionally satisfying story for an audience. So sometimes that means you have to work with your team. You also want to have conversations and communication with your group if you're doing a show, to make sure that you're getting interesting dynamics and interesting balances and characters who can function together as a unit. Because if you get characters who are not going to speak to each other the entire series, that can be funny for 1 episode. But if you're talking 60, 100, 200 episodes, and both players have decided, oh, my character would never be willing to work with this person or talk to them, that's not a functional plan
Well, I feel like
for a show.
that's something that like you see like in TV shows. Like you have like the grumpy older person, the plucky younger one. They don't see eye to eye.
Like
They
if you want to do it
eventually,
like a Legolas Gimli thing,
yeah.
that's great, but that you need to be planning an arc for that and how you're going to make that work. And that requires a sense of where you're going a bit, or at least a conversation between the two players going, so here's the arc we want to go on, and involving the DM in that conversation. But that, again, you're taking out a little bit of the improvisational nature of the development of those relationships. I generally think that those kinds of relationships are not fantastic at most tables.
Mm-hmm.
I think having player groups and parties that are going to work together towards common goals and be able to communicate as a group, both as players but also as characters, really makes for a more fun game for everyone generally.
Mm-hmm.
I see far fewer issues when groups are cohesive like that than when people are sort of trying to do very different things and don't have a common purpose.
So
and have created characters that don't work together.
yeah, no, I can see that. So we can sort of see. I can think it's quite easy to follow like the path of, like you said, you started acting really young, and then I can see why people might see how that would lead to something like an actual play, right? But how did you end up breaking into like? Because I always joke that like I'm good at funny voices, but I don't know how to play in D&D that well. There's a lot of stuff to read, right? How did you end
There's
up sort
so
of
much material.
breaking into like the industry? Because it's kind of boomed in the last sort of 5-10 years,
It's been
massively.
wild to see how the industry's grown in the last few years. I never planned this. I was, producing full time. I was working in TV full time, as a producer, and uh but I was playing games. I had friends who were playing games, and I started doing some streaming. I started doing some charity events. But I also started I eventually made my own show. I had been developing a show and had talked to Wizards of the Coast about that project, which ended up not going. But then I had another project I developed that we did go with and we did make, leading up to the Descent, which was the Avernus book launch. And it did very well, and we were very lucky. It was incredibly well received. It was really different than any other shows that were out there at that point. Um, I had already been on a number of actual plays and things, but I think when I started out, I think part of the reason is I started in the industry very early in the era of people doing actual play and talking about tabletop. But I also think there weren't a lot of people like me at the time. I think mostly it was cis het white men.
Whoa,
Not
hold
a
on.
lot of
Color
I
me
know it's shocking,
surprised.
right? Um, there weren't a lot of disabled people. There weren't a lot of non-men um talking about playing on stream, and in particular DMing, or talking about DMing. And I had been playing D&D at that point probably for 15 years, and DMing for, you know, a substantial portion of that. But now it's been over 20. And so it was I had been involved in the game in a really long time and had been really passionate about it for a long time. So I think that was part of it as well, is that I really felt like I had credibility in terms of when I got challenged on my experience, which is what happens whenever you are, in a geek hobby often. I had no problem, talking about Thaco and talking about, things from previous editions, which unfortunately, there was a lot of sort of proving that you belonged. Um, so I think those were all part of it. So I think a lot of it was just right place, right time. And and then all of a sudden the industry was enormous. And
Mhm.
that was just a wild thing to see happen. Um, and then I was writing and consulting and things just kept growing. So it's been an incredible experience. But I don't think that I don't think there's a secret. I think everyone's experience with breaking in is very different.
Mhm.
I think Mark Wade said that it's like breaking out of prison. No one does it the same way, and once you do, they close that way up behind you. For breaking into comics, and I think for tabletop, it's the same thing. It's a very unique journey.
It's interesting that you touch on gatekeeping as well, because I think I'm a nerd, and there's been a great synthesis of nerd geek culture, however you want to spin it, over the past decade. I mean, I remember when going to see a Marvel movie, people raised their eyebrow at you. I remember
Hmm.
those days. And it's interesting that you point out gatekeeping and like that essence of having to prove yourself in like this already, like, I'm not going to use a minority, but like niche circle anyway. Like a lot of people might
I
think, well,
mean,
that's where the nerds go.
I was going to my local game store for many years was this tiny hole in the wall that, stacked to the ceiling with dusty games and minis and things. And it was years before they would even talk to me. And everyone assumed I was there to buy books for my boyfriend. And, that was standard fare. But I've also worked in male dominated industries my entire life. And, I worked at a comic book store. These weren't new experiences for me. Unfortunately, they were common experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I would like to, I'm glad that has reduced, but it certainly has not gone away. And, every however many months we have to do the women have been involved in D&D from the beginning, and, queer people have been involved in D&D from the beginning. Like, it just, all of those conversations we have to keep repeating, and it's not ideal.
Tiresome, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, no, I can resonate with that. So that's one big take. Let's talk about accessibility consultancy. Talk about
Mhm.
that. Can you tell us a little bit what that involves? How you sort of got there as well?
Yeah, so I've been doing work in disability for a very long time. I've been, involved with the disabled community since I was a kid, really. And then I studied disability studies in college at UC Berkeley, and had been, involved in disability activism, disability justice movement stuff for a long time. And I had noticed that there was a real lack of representation of disability in tabletop games, in fantasy worlds, and had started, designing around that and speaking out about it. About 6 years ago, I think I put out a survey because I had started designing some different devices and things like that, and was planning on writing a book about it, and put out a survey saying, hey, if you're, a disabled person who plays tabletop games, what is missing? What is inaccessible about these products for you? What would you like to see in them more? And I got a huge response to it, and ended up, messaging Wizards of the Coast and saying, look, I have this amazing information. I really think it's important that you take a look at it. May I send it over? And really tried to have a lot of conversations, because at that point there was no accessible format for the core books. So, anyone who used a screen reader or alternate formats had no access to the material. Um, there was zero disability representation really in the game, other than the occasional, like, very tropey blind monk kind of situation, um, or villainy tropes around, facial or limb difference and things like that. Monstrosity, blah blah blah.
Hmm.
Um, and to me, they were important conversations when you have 26% of the world, like, being disabled. Like, we should be having representation of that, and especially in fantasy worlds where you're fighting monsters. And, to me, that just seems like you would have higher rates of disability than the real world. I mean, it just, for so many reasons, it's much cheaper to go build ramps than it is to keep having clerics come do very expensive procedures to regrow limbs that have been lost. But also, if you have limb difference from birth, that's not something that the magic, uh, at least in the rules, could change.
Hmm.
And also, not everybody wants to change it. It's not a bad thing. Um, so, all of those things um, were things that I started talking about. So people started asking about consulting. The more I talked about it, and um, I do sensitivity consulting. I do reading on material. I look at mechanics people put out. Mostly, I do a lot of story consulting. I teach people about disability tropes, um, stigmatizing language, things like that. And then I got really tired of answering the same 5 or 6 questions over and over. So I created the Accessibility and Gaming Resource Guide, so that I could say, here are resources. If you can go take a look at these, educate yourself. And if you can't find the information in here, then we can have the higher order discussions at that point. But
Hmm.
here's the material you need to do 101. And please go do this, so that, people can not have to have those conversations constantly. But I think we are seeing better representation, both in TV and film, in games, in who is getting to play those games on camera, things like that. So I really am very excited. Um, I worked on, I think I have it nearby. I worked on Clementine. Yeah, here we go. Um, worked on this graphic novel
Nice.
for Walking Dead, and, this is a queer Black young woman who's an amputee, and she's our lead character, and she's awesome. And for this book, we had multiple consultants come in and talk to the team and make sure that we were getting really good, authentic representation. And there's a scene in the graphic novel where Clem gets fitted for a prosthetic, and I've never seen that in any media ever. And I think it's really meaningful and really important, and destigmatizes a lot of this.
No, I think you're incredibly articulate. I know you're used to talking about this. You know what I mean. But I think it's really important to point out that you're doing amazing work. That's really important
Thank
just
you.
to highlight. Like it's one of those. I think it's easy to look at like the guide and just not like appreciate the effort that went into producing it. And I think even on like a base level, like as someone who just like walked into TTRPGs one day, like I went to like play at a cafe and spoke to the GM, and I was like, by the way, I'm blind. I don't think the standard character sheet's useful for me. They were able to just go online. Like I found a large print version like so easily, and it's really useful. I keep a blank PDF version of it. And as you mentioned, like the core books, like just having it on like an app to read is
Yeah,
so much better
I
than.
mean, D&D Beyond, I don't even think realized what an asset it was for the blind low vision community when they launched the site. That there were, I know it's not perfect in terms of tables and things, but to even have the material from the books in even a semi-accessible format was such a leap forward. And they're continuing to improve that, with consultants, and it's constantly getting better and better. So the fact that now you have a format where you can enlarge the font, where you can get a screen reader to read the books as soon as they're released, that's an equity of access that never existed before.
Mhm.
Um, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, it really is, and I think it's a testament to people like yourself who have made people like me be able to join the table, if you will. And I think it's just really important to highlight that. I don't think that it's not like people aren't giving you enough credit personally, but we really need to be mindful of the fact that there is a lot of work that goes into this. Just as you say, because
There's a
generally,
huge community too who are doing that work and working to make, content accessible, to, publish in accessible formats, to caption streams. Like there are so many things that people are doing now that they weren't before, and there are so many people who are vocally advocating for it. It's really remarkable. I
mhm.
mean, we still have more to do, but it's been, you compare now to a year ago, and you compare a year ago to 5 years ago, and it's just night and day. It's a completely different world.
So
We're getting
can
accessibility information in official books. We're
yeah.
getting things like the Fate Accessibility Toolkit, which just won an Emmy, and is one of them. It's the reason I didn't publish my book, is because that book was so comprehensive and extraordinary, um, and written by many disabled people about their lived experiences and translating that into game mechanics. Um, it's amazing. It's just spectacular.
So I know you mentioned a little bit before about like you kind of live in this magical, I'm gonna almost like feels like espionage world of NDAs and such,
I
where
do.
all these
Yeah.
wonderful things are happening behind the scenes. Can you tell us about anything that you're else that you're working on recently, or that is sort of like come out? You mentioned that you're on a few shows at the moment. Like, do you want to sort of mention anything
Yeah. I
specifically?
can talk about the shows I'm on. I am currently on three different streaming shows. The Vampire is close to wrapping up. But on Tuesdays on the Demiplane channel, I am part of Children of Erte, which is a show that is DM'd by Deborah Ann Wool, and our cast is me, Adam Bradford, Lauren Urban, Hope Lavelle, and Alicia Marie. And it's 5e, but it's modified 5e because we started the story as characters in the real world, and we have gone to a place where magic is slowly suffusing us and transforming us, and we're sort of in a magical world now that we are exploring. And I love those people. I've played with most of them for many shows over the course of the last 5 years, and I love them like family. So
Hmm.
that's an incredible group. And Deborah is such a phenomenal storyteller. I mean, her world is so beautiful and nuanced and evocative. It's incredible. Um, so we are 20 episodes in on that. We've been going, since March on
Mhm.
that show. And I am so proud of that show. I think we all put more work into those characters than any other characters we've ever played, which is saying something.
Mm.
Um, Wednesdays I play Vampire the Masquerade. We have a campaign set in Miami. That is a really fun show. We're in our second season. And we're just a chaotic, kind of ridiculous coterie who just gets into lots and lots of trouble. And I love that cast, and that's a fun one. We all dress up for that one, and so we all look very different. And my character there is just cynical and angry. She's a lot of fun.
It's
She's
not
goth
relatable at
and
all. Like,
vicious La Sombra. That's where I just get to unleash when I've had a bad week, I wait for Wednesday and then I get to just unleash Giselle, who also has like this fantastic backstory that I'm very proud of. But it's a ton of fun, and Vampire is such an interesting system. And their lore goes so deep. That it's a blast. And then Fridays we're doing a show that is a collection of adventures from Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, which is the book that came out from Wizards of the Coast. That was the first ever book written by an all POC creative team. And it's incredible. It's a collection of one shots as well as a setting,
ooh.
kind of a almost like a sigil like port city that can become a hub to other places, but also functions as its own setting. And in that, I play a cottagecore College of Creation bard, who's a Spring Eladrin, and they channel their magic through flower arranging and sound like they're from Fargo.
That
And
sounds great.
they're a delight. I love it. And we're getting to play with a number of the authors from the book. And also, speaking of sports, Johnny Stanton's been in our cast last week and will be back this week. I know this is airing way down the line after that is long done. But it's just, that's one of the things that's kind of funny about my job is like who my colleagues are now, because I just crack up sometimes when I look at who I get to work with on some of these projects, because when I was younger, if you told me, some of the tables that I would get to sit at, and, people I have watched on TV or in movies for many years and really admire and respect, or, sports figures or pro wrestlers, or like, there are so many incredible people, authors, that's been one of the really amazing things about getting to do this as a job now.
Sorry, I'm
Um,
sorry for the benefit of listeners. I'm sorry with just a big grin on my face, just because like your excitement is so palpable. Like I love it. Like it genuinely feels so infectious. You can hear it.
I
What
mean, I get paid to go play games. I mean, it's the best job ever.
I mean, you don't have to rub it
um,
in. Come on.
but also, I'm very, very lucky on so many levels. Because of the pandemic, if I had not been able to really lean into this stuff and hadn't, you know, been doing this for several years prior, and sort of starting to establish myself in this industry, I don't know what I would have done to survive the pandemic career wise, because I still can't go on set. The pandemic's not over. And we're 3 years
Newsflash
in,
for
and
some people.
yeah, shocking. It doesn't go away just because people stop wearing masks. In fact, not the best plan. And so I can't go be on set with 200 people anymore. In the same way, it's just not safe. I'm immunocompromised. I didn't mention also, I didn't do a visual description. I'm sorry. I am a white person, femme presenting. I'm wearing a black shirt. I have red curly hair or wavy hair. And I'm sitting in front of kind of a magical forest background. Um, I apologize for not saying that earlier.
No, it's all right.
Um,
I don't think I think I've done one like once, just because obviously I don't really change. I just go think of psychologist, make it albino, you're there. Uh, and am I wrong though? You know what I'm saying?
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
But no, thank you for the
Um,
description there.
yes. And I was saying something before that and I completely blanked because I have ADHD and my brain just did a little blip. Oh, because I was talking about my disabilities. So I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. I also have POTS, and MCAS and a bunch of other fun and exciting things, but I am immunocompromised. So I've been in basically total isolation for 3 years, with one little 3-month blip where I didn't have to be quite as careful, but was still very careful. But the only reason I have been able to continue to make a living is because of, you know, virtual work,
Mhm.
and because I was already set up to continue streaming, that I had the equipment from the beginning of the pandemic. So as soon as people had nothing to do, we started doing more streaming shows and had the gear to do it. So I'm just so grateful to this industry for many, many, many reasons.
There was
But I
several.
never expected to do this full time.
I mean, I think obviously we all sort of understand that the boom that there was during the pandemic with sort of e-technologies, and there was a joke at the time like it's the rise of the nerds because all of us that knew how to work from home were already winning. Um, but I think you're right. I think it has boomed, but I think it's good because it allows people like yourself to flourish, and I think that's important. Um, so this is cheeky. It's cheeky of me to ask. You don't have to, but could you give? Because obviously, I know a bit of your work. You know, did you maybe give us a little flavor of some of your characters, or maybe some of the voices?
Oh yeah, okay. Now I'm gonna be embarrassed because uh so Maeve, who is my character on Children of Erte, is I am not going to give her class or race because those are things that are being slowly revealed.
Spoilers.
So there's still speculation on that.
Ooh.
But Maeve is she's 22. She's very much responsibility avoidant. Um,
like
and
every
she
22-year-old,
is,
right? Like
yeah. And she's Irish American and she is a troublemaker. She's a prankster. She's heavily based on Jim Halpert from The Office and
nice.
Lulu from Crashing, Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character from Crashing, and a little bit of Matilda Wormwood in there.
I'm like
And
you've just said
yeah,
three pop culture references, and I understood all of them. I feel proud of myself.
yeah, yeah. Like I just needed those touchstones to find her, and that's as soon as I had that, I was like, oh, I know exactly who she is. So she's really fun, and I wanted to have, because Children of Verte is basically it's a fairy tale. I wanted to go to the root. I love fairy tales. I love mythology and folklore, and
The
so many of those
wood
are
magical woodsy background doesn't give that away at all.
no, not at all. No, but I've academically studied a lot of folklore and mythology and things, and I'm fascinated by sort of the liminal phases that you're going through for those stories. There are always stories about change and transition,
Hmm.
and finding yourself. And so to me, the modern equivalent, it used to be when you were, in your early teens, and now to me it's like the just out of college, don't really have a career path yet, don't know what you're doing with yourself in the world, haven't figured out how to be a person completely. And so I wanted to have Maeve in that place when we started, and we moved forward with that. So that's Maeve. Giselle is a little bit older than Maeve. She's really goth. She's really sarcastic. Her habits for feeding involve basically rubbing the person's face in their own failures. She's a La Sombra, so La Sombras are all about I mean, they're basically social Darwinists. The idea is like, we're going to make things as difficult as possible for you, and if you can survive that and succeed, then you are worthy of, being one of us and of having power. But you
Nice.
have to fight for everything. So she's constantly looking for the person who's not in first place, but is hungry and is in second place.
Mm.
And that's the person she'll go after. But she is really, she's a fun, spooky troublemaker too. I have two troublemakers, and then I have Wisteria, who's my Radiant Stories Spring Eladrin, who, Wisteria is just here, and she really and Wisteria just, they really want to have a nice time. They run a book club with their friend Edity, who's a Myconid, and they like to make tea, and all of the flowers that Wisteria's almost reads like a druid, but they're a bard. I looked into flower languages, and the Radiant Citadel is very much a a place where cultures, where there's a lot of fusion, and
Mhm.
so many cultures have flower arranging as an art form. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to channel that in. And so I went and found flower languages. So all of Wisteria's spells are tied to specific flower language meanings. Um, yeah.
That's just, it's so good. It's just so interesting. Like again, like it's that, like for maybe like you, myself as a more casual player, the fact that you can so easily and like you embody those people despite the disparate differences, and you just kind of know who they are, is really really cool.
It takes a lot of work though. I mean, that's not an instant thing. And there are certainly shortcuts for some characters, or if I'm doing a one shot and I need a character, you're always going to go for a broader character who, it's better to sort of have a one trick pony for a one shot where your character has one gimmick and one sort of ongoing joke. But when you're talking about a character like Maeve, who I knew I was going to have to play for years potentially, um, I did so much work on her. And as a group, we did a lot of work together, talking about who our characters were and really trying to think about flaws for them, because we knew we had the time to let them go on a journey and grow. But also what we could learn from each other. So, for example, Maeve has some real trust issues, and we have a character named Robin who's a woman in her 80s. And she had a wonderful, loving partnership with someone for many, many, many years. Um, and so Maeve can learn from that. Like there's something about seeing someone who really gained so much from that partnership that Maeve can go, oh, that actually, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe that's something I do want to have at some point in my life. Um, or one of the other characters, Maeve and this other character actually work at the same law firm. Maeve works in the mailroom, and this character is a high-powered lawyer. And Maeve looks at Firuza and she goes, they're the same age basically too. But Maeve can look at Firuza and go, oh, this is a person who's very accomplished and has a direction and knows what they're doing. Maeve is really smart, but she intentionally makes bad choices. But looking at people who are intentionally making good choices is something to learn from over the course of the series. So every single character has something that's a potential point of conflict and a potential point of connection, um, that I think really informed how we design those characters. And I mean, I have pages and pages and pages of work I did on Maeve before she ever saw the screen. I have journals I wrote as her. Like I did basically an acting preparation for Maeve.
I think it's worth pointing out, if you will pardon the both localized in terms of me being English and a football slash soccer fan, but also the slight swoon. Like, it's important for listeners to understand that we're not just talking. You are a professional. You are like the top tier. You're the Premier League of TTRPGs, with the Mo Salah, if you will. Like, we're not just talking about like, oh, I'm gonna roll some dice with some pals, and that's why it's important that like all that effort goes into making a character that is, I think, but believable. I think, who was it? I think it might have been like Meatloaf that talked about like when you're on stage, you're there to sell something to the audience, and ideally they should, for that moment, suspend their belief in reality and believe that it's real.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, suspension of disbelief is part of storytelling, right? I mean, you go to the movies, you know that the people on screen are not actually these people, but you're willing to accept that they are for that couple of hours. You're willing to engage with their story. The interesting thing about tabletop is often you'll have people sort of switching between themselves and their characters because you'll be providing commentary and you'll be describing what you're doing as well as having the dialogue and characters. So it's a little bit different than going to see a play, or even seeing an improv show where people are in character the whole time.
Mhm.
You're coming in and out of it, which is really interesting. But I also do want to note that just because this is my job, I also still play in home games. I still play with friends and often with a lot of the people I do shows with. But um, it's always been very important for me ever since this became my job, um, that I also have games where I can show up in my pajamas and eat pizza and not have to worry about if I mess up a spell or if I do a mechanic wrong or if I make a bad choice or a mistake. Um, you know, that I need to keep a love of the game, for myself, as well as coming in and doing the professional work
Mhm.
in the industry.
Well, that acts as a very nice segue to sort of my next sort of formalized question, if you will, is what do you like to do when you're not working? Now, obviously, as you touched on before, COVID withstanding. What is it that you do when you're not working? Obviously, you mentioned you still play games, but what else? What tells a bit more
I
about
still
you?
play games. I love TV and film. I'm fascinated by those processes, so I watch a lot of TV and film. Um, I read. I love comics. I'm a huge nerd. But
You
I
don't
do
say.
do a lot of game work. Um, I hang out with friends. I don't know. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
um, it's weird.
You're a normal person,
Just
right? Like,
because, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of strange interests, but also the weird thing about what I do is because I have so many different parts of my job. Often it doesn't feel like I just get stuck doing one thing. So I get to switch modes throughout the day. Um, Today I'm doing this, and then I'm meeting with a group of people on a different project doing something completely different. And then later today I have a show, and you're just constantly sort of switching between modes. So it's never boring, because it's always different.
mhm.
And sometimes it's disability work, and sometimes it's I'm working with, video game teams. I just worked on for Walking Dead. We just did The Last Mile, which is a video game that is a really cool interactive um, experience. I don't even know how to explain it. It's a massive interactive live experience, is what Mile means. And it's, so I got to do some video game work and graphic novel stuff, and so you're just constantly going between these different modes and trying to learn, and then also just trying to keep up with what's happening in all of those industries. um yeah,
So have you sort of
I
watched
don't know.
anything that really sort of caught your eye recently? I think because from what you've said, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it's a little known fact. I actually did media before I moved to psychology. So like I kind of noticed now that when I watch stuff, it's like a dual modality of like watching
Mm-hmm.
it as a consumer and like analyzing it, and then you throw psychology in there. Well, I basically can't watch anything for fun anymore. I'm joking. But like there is this like weird sense of you almost have to like not watch something properly to be able to enjoy it. If that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like I have like a lot of stuff like on my second
Yeah.
screen and I can enjoy it more.
Yeah. I love part of it is though that I love filmmaking, and so I really enjoy. I mean, my brain does split into the what kind of lens were they using there? How did they get that shot? What did that person do in that performance while watching the story, but also just appreciating the the piece for itself. But I thought Sandman was unbelievable. I'm a huge Sandman fan. I've cosplayed a couple of the Endless, and I was very, very nervous about that adaptation, and I just feel like they knocked it out of the park. Um, I thought that was just spectacular. I've rewatched recently all of Mike Schur's shows. I think those are incredible. So The Good Place and um Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Parks and Rec. Um, I don't know. in terms of films, I thought The Green Knight was unbelievable. Just the swings for the art form there was so phenomenal. Mythic Quest is taking huge swings. Ted Lasso is taking huge swings. Um, I mean, there's so much out there that's so incredible.
There is a lot of good stuff. I think like
There's
there's an oversaturation of goodness.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, we are so fortunate, but also now, we're getting into horror movie season, which is one of my favorite things ever. So I am I'm gonna be living in that mode for a while. Not that that's a huge shift from what I normally do, but um I'm very excited for Halloween season.
Okay. So if sort of just then to sort of round it off for sort of listeners' benefit, you finish work. What's the first thing you wanna do? What's that sort of like first like
Well,
separation from
I mean,
work and
it's tough because so often my day is so spread out. So yesterday I started my day, my first meeting. I'm working with a team that's based in the UK. So I had a meeting at 9 a.m. and then I worked all day and then we had a show at night. So we finish at 8. And then it's usually trying to get something to eat, trying to, get out of hair and makeup and, into pajamas basically as soon as you can, sweatpants.
big win?
And decompress a little bit, but often at the end of the day, it's trying to make sure I've gotten through what I needed to do that day, switching my brain out of whatever the last thing was. And if I need to continue doing work, like last night, I still had work to do after I finished. So I worked until midnight last night. Yesterday was a long day. Um, but I took a break to eat and change into comfy clothes. And then I worked and then I got in bed and I watched what was I watching? Oh, I was rewatching Pushing Daisies, which I love. And everything I watch gives me ideas. I mean, I'm constantly writing down ideas of either things I want to write or things I want to develop or, characters I might want to play or or quests I might want to put into an adventure. Um, every time I'm consuming media, there is a part of my brain that's going, what can I take from this? What can I steal? Because sometimes, I've had weeks where I'm doing 4 charity events and I'll need to have characters for each of those. And you don't, if you can help it, you don't want to keep repeating characters. So it's every time you're trying to come up with something new.
Hmm.
Um, One shots are great for stealing characters from other things and putting them in. Um, that's the best way to come up with a character on the fly for a one shot is just to drag something out of another project and throw it into
Hmm.
the one shot.
So
Yeah, but long days sometimes.
okay.
But also you'll sometimes have hours or 2 hours between things. So
Mhm.
it can be very weird.
Such as the nature of like just being a project modality, like just like that's the way
Hmm.
it can go. Sometimes you can have random hours and then things like that. But it's good that
Yeah.
you highlight that you do try and find time for breaks and food. Like that's very important.
Yeah. And I also have little things for each, especially for the shows, to kind of switch myself into that show because it can get very confusing. One of my shows, Radiant Stories, has 3 of us who are on Children of Erte. So I look at my screen and I see the same 3 people, and it immediately, like, my instinct is to go into Maeve, and it's like, no, 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 that's the wrong character. So I have little cues I give myself for each of the shows. Whether it's costume pieces, I have a perfume I use for Maeve so that I have a sensory cue. Wisteria, I have a flower crown thing so I can actually see myself and go, oh, right, I'm this character. Um, Maeve has a playlist I listen to as I'm getting ready. So I have opportunities to sort of switch modes into whatever I'm working on. And I try and leave some time to decompress after because often after shows, you go on this adrenaline rush and then you need a little time to come off of that.
Hmm. So one of my sort of next, like again, we have like a little list of fixed questions, but we like to meander. It's how we roll. But this one is kind of a nice one. It's if you had no limitations, so you had unlimited access to resources and people and expertise, What's like one blue sky project you could do? You'd want to do?
I have a couple of different D&D TV show project ideas that I would really love to get made.
Hmm.
Um, and with my TV production experience, I feel like there are things that that are I've really tried to develop as things that are very different than anything anybody's done before. Because I think one of the things that's happened with the boom of the tabletop industry is we've gotten very oversaturated with actual plays.
Hmm.
And often people aren't using that as an opportunity to do something new. So they all look alike, but they're also doing the same things. They're not really bringing in anything new. They're not bringing anything new to the table, for lack of a better term. Um, and so when I'm thinking about the things I want to develop, and I tend to be very deliberate and not put out a lot of things because I'm taking the time to make sure the project is the right project and that it has the right people involved and that we're making something really, really different. So I have a couple ideas, some of which are involve gameplay, some of which don't involve any gameplay at all, some of which are scripted, some of which are unscripted. Um, and I would love to get to make one of those, or a couple of those. Um, yeah,
Like a couple of like
I think
TV
having
slots, like a couple of big productions, like.
yeah, I mean, I think the thing, I mean, this is very inside baseball, but the problem with adapting D&D for TV is D&D needs a lot of time to
Hmm.
work. And the reality with TV is you have an hour, you have 42 minutes usually. Um, and it's how do you and also D&D is not visually that interesting to look at generally. How do you keep the integrity of what the game is while also addressing those things and making it something that is watchable and that is fitting the 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 parameters that the media format requires. Um, and also the other big blue sky project I would love to do is I would love to have Del Toro make a Ravenloft film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's the other one that I
That,
I
that's
want.
yeah. I love the way you just like mic dropping that. I am, but if I had the money, by the way, this. Okay, no, it's pretty. I can.
I think that would be incredible, and I think it's such a great setting for him to play with. Um, but yeah,
Well, internet, are you listening? Do your business. Get onto it. Let's make it happen. You know, like. One of my favorite questions on this sort of show is, what is there anyone at any sort of thing that you want to give like a little shout out to, like a thanks? 'Cause I think a lot, the sort of
oh my
premise for
gosh.
this is, why do we do the things that we do? How did we get there? What's the motivation? And I think a big part of that is usually people. And I think it's really nice to just, I like to give my guests the chance to just shout out like a person or a couple of people, um, just to
Yeah,
hear
I
to
mean,
hear
I think
that's impacted you.
in general the folks who are really leading um conversations in the disability community are so important to my life and the way I look at the world, and the way I approach my work. So people like Alice Wong, um, people who are doing this deeply foundational work, um, and you know tirelessly advocating for for access, equity, rights. That is I, I don't even have words uh, for how important that is, and how much that has impacted my life and the work I do.
Mm. No, that's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair. But it's nice to just to hear people talk about other people they like. I'm sort of always reticent to do this type of thing, but I would be remiss if I didn't. Have you got any advice for people playing TTRPG?
Absolutely. So for people playing TTRPGs in general, or for people who are trying to pursue a career in the industry, or Um,
Whatever you fancy, maybe even just playing. How can you improve just as a player? You know, is a perfectly sort of good angle.
um, make your purpose at the table to enable the success of the person next to you. Um, the more you can set up everyone at the table to succeed, the more fun everyone's going to have. And also communication is key. You know, this is a game. If people aren't having fun, something is wrong and you need to be stopping and talking about it. So things like safety tools are really important. But communication is absolutely essential. Um, I think those are sort of, as a player, some of the most important things you can think about when you're gaming. Um, how can you set up the person next to you so that their character can achieve the goals they want to achieve, or how can you work together to make something really cool happen? um this is not a solo sport, you know, this is not a video game. This is a collaborative storytelling endeavor. um and working as a team is always going to make for a much more fun, interesting, exciting experience than trying to go out there and solo it. You know, I think character flaws are really interesting. Unbalanced characters are interesting when it's designed not to min max, but to create a more nuanced person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there's no winning D&D. You know, if you cap all your stats at 20 and you have all of the magic items, congratulations, what are you going to do now? You know, the journey of the story is the important part.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing on the story that you're telling about these characters and what they do is what's interesting. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
No, no, it did. Like, it's just. I think again, if you don't know TTRPGs that well, and I'm not pretending like I do, but like I think it really is almost difficult to get your head around that. And again,
Yeah,
tapping into
one
your
of one of my
expertise.
absolute favorite moments as a DM is when I have someone who's only played video games and they start playing tabletop games, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and they just have that moment where all of a sudden they kind of knock up against a wall and the wall falls over, and they go, wait, but there's supposed to be a wall here. And you know, as the DM, you're adjusting to the thing they did, and they're going, how is that happening? And then they start sort of running around pushing down all the walls and just realizing what they can do in a situation where it is infinitely flexible and responsive to their actions in a way that a video game never can be. um Not that I don't adore video games, because I do, but they do different things. And what's amazing about tabletop is it's a place for connection between people.
Mm-hmm. I think you touch on something really interesting there because I play a lot of games. Video games are my primary hobby, but when you sit down for a tabletop, it's like it's the limitation is only it's not the code, it's not these invisible walls. It's like it's your imagination, and there's something that
Mhm.
I know people in like educational psych that look at play and bring a play back into the classroom, but even just like the actual getting to use your own imagination and creating like
Mhm.
a silly situation for your character to be in is so wonderful. Like it's such a delight,
Mhm.
and you don't get to do that enough in like today's deeply cynical, rotten capitalist world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you can imagine better worlds. And also, I think, you know, people talk so much about the realism of worlds and why things have to be, you know, gritty and bleak and all of these things. And they use, you know, horrible real world things as motivation for things. And no, we can imagine better worlds. We can imagine, you know, reasons to take action that are not rooted in racism and sexism and, you know, colonialism. And there are other ways to approach this. And I think there is value to imagining worlds that are better, um, than our own. Um, that are more inclusive, that are more accessible. Like, it costs nothing to imagine an accessible building in a fantasy game.
That's
You don't
what
have
a
to worry about
quote that is. That's amazing.
building codes or permits. Like, it's just as easy to make your setting completely accessible as it is to you can just as easily describe a ramp as you can stairs.
One of my favorite
Yeah.
quotes around that is like from Take This as Dr. B. And he's like, one day I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna play a
I love
character who's had
Dr.
like
B.
a perfectly good childhood with parents that loved them and have no significant trauma. And like, it just never happens because like you can
Oh yeah.
imagine that like it could happen.
Oh yeah. No, I don't often play orphans. I don't often play. I mean, significant trauma. I feel like everyone plays edgelords, and you don't have to. There's no reason you. I mean, look, deciding to go out adventuring is not, and putting yourself intentionally in perilous situations doesn't necessarily speak to the healthiest mindset, but um you don't have to come from that severely traumatized background. And as a DM, you do not need to take every character that a player gives you in their backstory and destroy them and use them as a tool to motivate your player. I think that's part of why people create orphans, is because they're afraid the second they put families into the games, the DM uses that as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's worth discussing with your players and talking about whether that's something they want, whether that's something they don't want. But yeah, healthy family. I'm here for the healthy family characters. I love it.
You touched on accessibility before. I'd love for you to, if you could, just tell us like what people can do, listen to this to help improve accessibility and representation within their games.
Um, Talk to your players. Make it clear that anyone who has access needs is more than welcome to ask for things and that you will accommodate those needs. I always try and think about the things I am describing in multiple modes. So I like to have, if I can, have a physical version as well as a descriptive version, tactile versus imaginative. Um, if you can, when you're describing places, think in all of your senses. Um, Taking breaks is key. I usually put breaks in anywhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours in, and every couple of hours. Um, I have an open table if people need to stand up, go to the restroom, whatever they need to do. You're more than welcome. If people need to use devices, that's fine. You know, it's really just allowing people to do the things they need to do to be able to focus and enjoy the game. Um, in terms of in world, just letting disabled people exist in the world where disability isn't their motivation for existing, where it isn't their defining characteristic. um where disabled people have jobs, and um where you have multiply marginalized people, where you have people who are in relationships and have families. um just including people in your world. Also, I think one of the things that I've really noticed is that for NPCs, and especially with monsters that you fight, people default to calling those creatures him. And have a table and randomly assign your pronouns to your NPCs for combat, and so that you are describing, because the way it's described, you would think there were never any female goblins ever.
You make a good
You're
point.
going, well, and so just even starting to think about that starts to change the texture of the world. um and being aware of where historically we have had things that are real world biases affect our narratives, and trying to get rid of that, you know
Mm.
and move away from that, and having conflict based not on dwarves hate elves, but rather this community has a conflict with this community, you know, this city with this city for this reason. It's, there's a trade dispute. There's a group that's been infiltrating and, stealing whatever. Like have actions rather than just like bioessentialism or just blanket statements about groups, I
Mm.
think, um, is key.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to all your listening out there. So, if you would so indulge me in some fun, because obviously we
Yeah.
talk about a lot of serious things, part of the point of the show, but if you'd indulge me in some fun, you are going on a retreat to a remote island of a weather system of your choice. I personally wouldn't
Okay.
choose tropical because, if you see me, I'm already sunburnt. Uh, so, yeah.
Similar situation here. Yep.
Yeah, I'd go somewhere much more temperate. But you're going away to this remote escape, and to take with you, you're allowed to take one film, one album, one book, and one game of your choice, video or board or whatever. The rules are you can have, like, if it comes in a collection or a box set, you can have that in one thing. Like, say, I've got the entire Witcher collection of one set of books. It sells in one thing. You can have that. And you can only sort of have like one of each form. What are you going to take with you?
Oh my gosh. Oh wow, that's really hard. Um, is there someone else there? Because that
just
changes the game.
just you. It's
It's
purely for
just
your own
you.
self-indulgence. And for magical reasons, everything works. Like, you have power and unlimited
I mean,
batteries.
for a game, I feel like it's gonna have to be something like Tetris, where it's just gonna be leveling up your skill on it. Because if you play a narrative game, you're gonna reach the end and then start over, and there's no real, there's not going to be anything you're really gonna grow. Like it'll get boring very fast, I think.
Okay.
Um, for a book, my first instinct is Neverwhere, but
It feels like such a devilish set of questions, but it's meant to be fun.
yeah, or maybe I don't know, maybe something like Lock and Key, like the whole Lock and Key series, or
Hmm.
Sandman, something like that, a graphic novel where you have art to look at as well as text.
Okay,
So there's
nice.
just going to be layers to that. If you're having to read this over and over. I mean, I don't know how long this retreat is, that changes it, I guess. Um,
For as long as you want it. That's the whole point. You're going
I
to
mean,
get away.
yeah, TV show, my favorite TV show ever is Slings and Arrows. So that's probably what I would take.
Nice.
What am I forgetting?
An album.
Oh, an album. Hmm,
It's not easy. Not easy.
so hard.
I've had a few people go sort of
Um,
like down that,
my
like,
brother makes my brother makes me mixes.
okay,
He has for years and years, and there's a mix that he made me that I really, really love. So probably a mix he made me
nice.
years
Can
ago.
you tell us maybe like a
So
little flavor of what's on it?
yeah, it has Radiohead, it has who all is on that? I'm trying to think through it. Dispatch is on there. Um, I think Postal Service is on there. I'm not. I don't have the playlist in front of me, so I'm blanking on a lot of it.
Sorry, don't
But
worry.
it's kind of an indie lineup. It's a pretty chill. Like it's not a. It's just good, relaxing music, and yeah, I think that probably would be what I take.
I mean, that's an excellent set of goods. I'll be fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up, one of the things I like to do is turn the tables upon myself and say, is there any questions you'd like to ask me? I will warn you that
Yeah,
I've had the desert island one before.
I want to know what you're working on right now.
What am I? Well, PhD life. There is no
Yeah.
rest for the wicked, and I clearly did some very horrible things in a previous life. So just sort of the video games, mental health research, sort of like looking at like experiments and collecting data. Um, but it's conference season, so I was up in York in September, sort of early September for the IGGI conference. So it was me and the game studies fam. That was really nice. Went to a workshop on
Nice.
accessibility actually because someone's doing their PhD there on like gaming accessibility. So I got a bit shouty in that. That was quite nice. Um, at the end of September, obviously this is for Jeremy Beremy reasons. This will be after this. This will be before this
Mm-hmm.
goes out. I'll be down in Brighton for the British Psychological Society Cyber Psychology Conference. Try saying that after
Nice.
a few beers. So yeah, I really enjoy public speaking. You never would have guessed. So I like presenting and talking about like what I'm doing. So it's more just kind of like I'm in the middle of like the whole journey. So there's like writing stuff up, but then trying to like be a person that's visible on like being on Twitter and like producing work. But obviously also doing all my fun charity things with people like Take This and Safe in Our World and that sort of business. So I'm never bored. Always busy, never
Yeah.
bored. But that was a really sweet question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me
No,
what are you up
I'm
to.
I'm so curious because I'm really interested in what's happening academically in games right now. I I gave the keynote at the Generation Analog conference this summer,
Sorry,
and
just
and
gave a keynote. Just really casually dropped
it
that
was
in
it
there.
was wild. It was wild. It was wild and terrifying, and I was very honored to be asked. But I was just really excited to be in a space with a bunch of academics and get to talk about the work everyone is doing and what people are doing research on, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. So yeah, I've been really enjoying hearing what people are working on academically with games and sort of the intersection of games um, and other fields. It's yeah, that's all very, very exciting to me. So I'm really curious about it.
Well, again, thank you for that, and I appreciate having a nice question to get. I've had some really like philosophical questions where I've gone, so that's nice. Uh,
Meaning of life kind of things.
I think I did get asked like, do you think games can teach us anything about humanity? And I was like, well, yes, because art is a representation of the people living at the time they expressed it, and just sort
Also
of
empathy
yeah, empathy's very good.
teaches you how to connect with people, critical thinking, creative problem solving, lots of stuff in there.
So as we wind down towards the end of this episode, I feel like I could keep chatting to you all night, but I won't keep you because you're a busy person. I respect that. Is there anything else that you want to give mention to, want to shout about, want to like let people know about before sort of
Um,
giving everyone your deets as to where they can
I'm
find you?
sure that I should be. Well, I'm not sure on the timing of this, but I think the Anansi's Tapestry of Lives Kickstarter is up when this is coming out, which is a book of NPCs for games. It'll have descriptions, opening monologues. All of those monologues are also going to be available as voiced by professional voice actors. Um, you get VTT tokens and all sorts of stuff. It's going to be really, really cool. And there's now, I think, over 85 people working on the book, all sorts of incredible folks, and mostly marginalized creators as well. So that's really exciting.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's Be Never Ending that are doing that. Is
Be
that
Never
right?
Ending, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So Never Ending is launching it. And I'm really excited. I designed a character in that who's an ambulatory wheelchair user, like me, and she is a like a circus performer, basically, as part of a troupe. And I also did the voiceover for her and one other character. So you can find that on Kickstarter. It's called Anansi's Tapestry of Lives.
Link will be
So
attached
that's
wherever you found this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so that's really fun. Come check out Children of Erte, and Vampire, I think, is over by the time this comes out. But
But
Radiant
it'll still
Stories
be
is still
linked.
going.
Don't worry, watch it all.
Yeah. Um, the Accessibility and Gaming Resource Guide. What else is going to be out by then? Trying to think what I can talk about and will be available. Um, Clementine is really fun. I'm really proud of it. I did not write it, but I consulted on it. So this is available at your friendly neighborhood comic shop. This is the first graphic novel of a 3 graphic novel series. If you played the Telltale Walking Dead games, you know Clem, and it's really fun to get to know her now as a teenager. I'm really proud of the work we did on those books. So yeah, we'll see what else is out by this point, but there's lots of fun projects happening in the works.
And then last but obviously not least, where's best people to find you? Obviously on the video version, your Twitter handle is on screen, but
Yeah, so the main place to find me is on Twitter. I am at Dreamwisp. That's the same on Instagram as well. You can find me on streaming on Twitch as Dreamwisp Jen, Jen, and those are the best spots. There are links on all of those to find the other places where I am.
excellent.
Yeah.
The last thing as well, I'm just going to drop it into the conversation because I also adore it. But like you have designed dice previously. That's a thing you've
I
done.
have. Yes. Where are my dice?
The
They
Dream
should
Wisp
be
dice. I
within
have a set
reach.
myself, and they're beautiful. I don't have it like on me because they're in
Oh,
display.
here's the uninked set. My inked set is, I think, buried under some stuff right now.
I feel like I've
But
caused a
these are
panic, and I didn't mean to.
no,
Uh,
they're usually right in front of me, so I'm a little surprised I can't see them from where I am. But
it's
yeah, these are you can get them through Die Hard Dice. These are called they're called the set with the inking, their high contrast is called chiaroscuro, and these are called tenebrism. I'm trying to get the bag open. And so yes, I designed these. So these are the uninked ones. This is tenebrism.
mhm.
Um, but they're like a midnight blue with sort of black and silver swirled through. And I'm very proud of them.
They are really nice. They're like I think the show imagery has them with like blueberries and stuff. But the
Yeah,
ink,
we took some Renaissance paintings because I that was where I what I based them on, and so the promo images look like oil paintings.
yeah, I mean they look wonderful, and the ink set is really nice, really high contrast, very nice for me being your blind boy that I am. So just wanted to mention that because I love them and I love a bit of fan service even on my own show. Uh,
Thank you.
Jen, thank you so
Yeah,
much for being on the show
thank you
with
so
me.
much.
I have been, I think I would almost go so far as say I've been thrilled to be with you, but I'm not changing the name of the
Oh, thank you. I
show
was thrilled to
at
be
this
here.
point. So I'm psyched to have been with you at this point. All that remains for us to do is
Right
say
back at you.
thank you everyone for listening. For our video people, I always do this. I always forget what the thing is. I'm going to flick over to our ending screen for like 2 seconds before I press the button. So that's now. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Do like, subscribe, leave reviews, check out Jen with all the links wherever you found all these shenanigans. And as ever, look after your mind, body, and soul. And I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.